Excellent. Welcome. Let's get started with the session. It seems to be a full house, which is pretty cool. It seems to be that the on-premises development is still a big thing, which is completely understandable. We are on the verge and on a journey to do something, but we will absolutely support the on-premises development as well. So today we're going to talk about future-proofing your on-premises SharePoint development. You can kind of figure out what we're going to have in the discussion. So we're going to talk about the SharePoint app model. We're going to talk about what does it mean in on-premises as well, and also how you can light up similar functionalities in on-premises, which you typically do within farm solutions. We're going to talk about also the transition. Before we go actually to the agenda and all of the content, let me introduce myself. So my name is Vesa Juvonen. I'm a senior program manager in Office 365 engineering, which includes also SharePoint, so on-premises. I run a program called Office 365 Developer Patterns and Practices, where we help customers and partners and all of the SharePoint developers to help to transition their code to the app model if they're interested, or then also give insights on the on-premises, how to kind of avoid common pitfalls if that deployment at some point is going to go to the cloud. So think through, for example, let's implement certain things in a certain way, because maybe after 3 years that deployment will go to the cloud, and what does it actually mean? So today we're going to talk about, if I can get the agenda slide working, there we go. So we're going to talk about slightly the development models in on-premises. What does it actually mean, and what do we want you guys to actually know about that one, where we are actually heading. I'm going to also talk about slightly the transformation approaches and the process. What does it actually mean if you are moving to the app model side? Let me be clear, there's a slides coming up as well. SharePoint on full trust solution, farm solutions, is fully supported in on-premises, and it will be. We're not taking that away. If that's what you were come to here to listen, you can now walk away. So that's cool. It will be completely fine, completely supported, but we as a Microsoft, we are heading more and more towards loosely coupled development, which we want that whenever you develop something, it works both in on-premises and within the cloud. And therefore, we're going to talk about slightly the transformation process, and you will get some insights what we're going to release later on that topic, which will help you on the transition to the other side. Then the final topic is more about farm solution consideration. So now that you still do farm solutions, because most likely you do, I was writing farm solutions earlier today as well for the demo, but still. What do you should be aware? What are those things what you would have to think about? How do you want to implement certain things if that deployment is going to move to the cloud? Going back on the previous slide, just to explain, so I'm one of the Office 365 engineering guys, but I'm in a slightly, let's say, different situation than typically. I work actually from Finland, and that's the reason because I'm talking Finnish. So sorry for the Finnish accent. Hopefully you can figure out what I'm actually still talking, and that's fine. At least I got a smile. That's good. Good. How I usually do presentations is that I want to make sure that if you're in a really rush, you want to go for a beer, you want to do something else, there's one slide which will essentially explain everything. So we can go through this slide and we can close the presentation, right? There will be more demos if you want, but you're more than willing to actually go for a beer if you like to do so. But anyway, the key topics of the presentation is that we are moving gradually to the app model. And we really want the on-premises move to the app model as well. And there will be additional insights on that one in the presentation as well. So the app model is the future of the SharePoint development, because then it's a loosely coupled. You don't have that challenge of a farm solutions that you cannot, for example, take the latest version of SharePoint into a use because your master pages or your customizations are blocking getting access on the latest version. And I do know, I used to teach in MC and the Master Certification program. My topic was actually full trust code solutions. So it's kind of an ironic that I'm now teaching people away from the farm solutions. But it is what it is, and that's where the direction where we are heading, and we are here in the Patterns and Practices guidance as well. We're here to help you, and you can give us feedback back, and we'll try to get stuff updated. If you need guidance, that's what we want to hear, absolutely. One of the kind of a topic when you start then transforming to the app model, we actually gradually are also getting away from the sandbox solutions and the feature framework. We kind of want to move away from the feature framework thinking because it has some downsides. As an example, quite often in a farm solution scenario, your site will be then dependent on files in a file system. which means that if you take the content database, if you take just one site collection, move that across, it doesn't actually work because it has a dependency on farm solutions or files within a file system. And that's one of the problems of a feature framework. At the same time, we need to remember that feature framework actually was released 2006. It's now 2015. It was an awesome ride, but I think there's a better ways of doing stuff as well. It takes a while, absolutely, to learn the better ways to do that, but I think and we'll get there gradually. It's a journey, and we absolutely get that. We're not pushing you on the limit against your will. We'll get there gradually. When we do the transformation, we really need to concentrate on the end-user experience. And that's one of the learnings what we've been doing. We've been helping a lot of enterprise customers moving to the app model, kind of converting their existing farm solutions. We actually don't concentrate on the farm solution itself, because the code is easy. What the code does is much more important. So what is the end-user experience? What does the code actually light up? If you just look on the full source code solution, you don't actually know, is that web part truly used? Is it critical? Is it actually used by the end users? You actually need to have that demo and have to have understanding how the end users utilize and use that customization in actually. And then you can start figuring out, okay, wait a minute, so how could we do this using the app model techniques? And then the final point is definitely understand the impact of farm solutions. I'm going to do a few demos on that one today, which was really nice, actually. It's been a while when I've written farm solutions, so it's really nice to actually do those demos, just to show you the impact and the possible challenges within the farm solution side. There will be quite a few demos. I'll start with So I start with a process discussion, and then we'll move on to that demo sections in the end. There will be cool demos in the end as well, so bear with me. Good. Let's move on to development model. So what are the different recommendations from the development model perspective? The reality is that we are truly heading to the app model in the on-premises side as well. That's the number one thing. We want you to gradually go to that direction, the loosely coupled way, so you're able to, for example, patch your customizations without impacting the availability of SharePoint. Classic challenge of full source code solution, classic challenge of farm solution. You always need to recycle application pools, there's downtime, you need to schedule that for the weekend. If you're not the weekend guy, that's fine, but for the guy who has to do that on weekend, he's losing his family time. That's not fair. That's a good excuse, by the way, to go to the app model. And I don't know if you actually listened, we're calling the apps nowadays add-ins, but I'll come back on that one, because the model is not about the apps in the store necessarily. Especially in Office 365 patterns and practices, we concentrate on enterprise development, not about the fact that you create an app in the store. That's absolutely an option, but typically enterprises are not looking into that one. They're looking much more on the remote provisioning, much more on how could I actually enable functionalities in the SharePoint side itself. Not about app parts, it's an iframe, it's not interesting, something else. I'm going to go through that one during today as well. Let's start with the common kind of statements. We really want to make sure that everybody gets this. I kind of mentioned this one already. Will farm solutions be supported in SharePoint 2016? Absolutely. We're not taking anything away. So you're completely safe on upgrading on the SharePoint 2016. Your customization should actually work almost as such. Well, as such, but I can't promise that in a 100% level, but they absolutely should be working as such. In 2010 to 2013, if you had a farm solutions, you didn't really have to do that much modifications. They just worked. And it's going to be pretty much the same thing between 2013 to 2016. So the farm solutions absolutely supported. The investments, however, are done in the app model side. So there will be some development improvements in 2016 in the app model side, which I'm going to talk about slightly later. But still, the server-side farm solutions are still absolutely supported. The second common kind of a question is that, okay, will you ever support farm solutions in Office 365? Answer is pretty simple. We can't. If you know how the farm solution actually works, it deploys those files in a farm level. In the Office 365 farms, we're actually hosting up to whatever hundreds of tenants. That would actually mean that your customizations would be visible or impacted or available across all of the tenants, and we can't actually go there. So we need to think about how can we do similar customizations using alternative options. And that's why we're heading to the app model thinking. One of the other statements or questions what we're hearing all the time is that people are seeing stuff in the interweb. There's a lot of statements, obviously. People are making weird conclusions about weird things. But we really want to make sure app model is not dead. App model actually is more alive than ever. We are really making all of the investments into app model in the on-premises as well. But we really want to make sure, and I'm come back on the fact that what does the app model actually mean. So it's definitely alive and definitely where we are heading. We might be thinking that in the future slightly differently. It's not necessarily a part. It's not necessarily an iframe, what it is actually in the future. But it's more about doing stuff remotely against SharePoint, not injecting stuff in the SharePoint and running the code in the context of SharePoint. That's the key different data. One of the signs of the fact that we're not killing the app model is also the Azure AD apps. I don't know how many of you actually know what is an Azure AD app, but we are bringing that Azure AD app registration story also to on-premises. So this is something... Yay! I got an applaud from the... Hopefully that was for the statement, not for the funky animation. It's just PowerPoint 2016. But what we're doing is that in the on-premises SharePoint 2016, if you have an internet connectivity and you register an app, you are actually able to register that same app ID and a secret to Azure AD, which means that now you can actually build hybrid solutions. So you can run stuff in the on-premises, but then maybe if the customer has a OneDrive in the cloud, you're able to access those files using Office 365 APIs and all of the other applications which are available in the cloud. If you are fully isolated and there's no internet connectivity within the SharePoint farm, then this option might not be actually that interesting for you. But then you can think about alternative ways of doing customizations, and let me come back on that one slightly later. But it's an interesting, it just shows the fact that we are still making investments, and we are highly committed on the app model. I know that from a marketing perspective, I'm from engineering, so I don't really think about the marketing stuff, and you can see that from my demos, they don't look that nice. But they work, usually. But from a marketing perspective, it might be confusing. We talk about SharePoint apps, we talk about SharePoint app model, and then we talk about Office 365 APIs. The SharePoint app model is not going to go away. It's the same remote API model. We use RESTful APIs, CSAM APIs to operate against SharePoint, and then we do something within the SharePoint to light up functionalities for the end users. So that's going to be there as a solid implementation. And the key point of all of this thinking is that we really want to make sure that you as a developer or as a vendor or whoever, you write an application or customization, it will work in the on-premises and it will work in the cloud as well. So cloud is not an exception, or the on-premises is not an exception. It's write once and it works in both sides. Right now there are certain, if you're really into see some insights of client-side object model, there are certain differences, but we are aligning them with on-premises and with the cloud. So we're looking into having the same client-side APIs, same remote APIs in the cloud and in on-premises where possible, because some of the capabilities are only within the cloud, like Delve or, well, there's the Delve hybrid story, but still, some of the capabilities are still limited in the on-premises, and they are not actually within the cloud. One of the things what we also wanted to make sure that you understand is that there's actually 3 ways of thinking SharePoint customizations. On the right side, we have the farm solutions, the typical full just code solutions, which are running code within the context of SharePoint. And in the future, we kind of more think about these as a partner-driven solutions, as a ISV solutions, somebody who's actually implementing tools and products over the on-premises SharePoint. You're able to do whatever you want, actually. You're able to write custom service applications, WCF endpoints, and so on, which might actually influence the content and that they might be problematic. But that's another discussion. On the right side, or left side, right side, left side, depending on which direction you're getting that. On the right side, we have the store apps. And that's usually people actually get highly confused when we talk about SharePoint app model. They immediately start thinking that if I implement something, it has to go to the Office store. And that's not the case. There's absolutely a valid store, and we're investing to the Office store as well. There will be a lot of additional apps coming up in the near future. And we will do improvements in the Office store as well. But the middle section is actually the one where which the enterprises usually approach the customizations. The middle section is actually client-side solutions. What it means is that we take advantage of the remote APIs. We are actually operating in the SharePoint sites. We are pushing stuff on the SharePoint site. We might, for example, create a sub-site. Then we create ACE content types. We create site collections. We create lists and all of that using APIs, not using feature framework. And we're able to build on that similar thinking. Or we embed stuff like JavaScript or whatever in the UI without using a SharePoint app. It's not an app that you go to the App Store. It's actually remote pushing and remote API usage of the SharePoint. And it's modifying the SharePoint UI. And that's the thinking. So if you think about SharePoint apps or add-ins, whatever is the term of the day, that's essentially both of those right-side topics. It's the Share Store apps and then the enterprise development, kind of the enterprise way of doing development against the SharePoint. Good. Before we go to the demos, and there will be cool demos, absolutely, as long as the connectivities and everything is working properly, crossing fingers. So let's talk about slightly the transformation process. So if you have existing farm solutions and you want to move to that model, you don't have to, like I said, we absolutely support them. But if actually somebody wants to move and align with the cloud or service roadmap, what does it actually mean? And I want to be really clear on this one. I'm from engineering, not from marketing, so I don't need to actually do white lies. Jokes. It essentially means that it's a rewrite of your customization from a technical perspective. Now, we need to be clear. Quite often, if you think about the implementation of a farm solution or whatever functionality within the code level, more time is actually spent on figuring out what do I need to do? What does the business logic do? How do I actually implement the functionality using whatever the technology is? That's where the time is spent. The actual coding is quite easy, or it's quite often quite easy. And that's where we don't spend that much time. Now that we're doing transformation, we actually know what that application has to do. So yes, it's a rewrite from a technical perspective, but it doesn't mean that we need to start from scratch. It's just starting scratch or converting the existing code. And in practice, it absolutely means that we're using the similar functionality, similar business requirements when we do the transformation on the other side. So we do utilize the existing functionalities, we transform that to the app model techniques. The end user doesn't necessarily even have to know that we're actually running the app model way of doing stuff. And that's what we're seeing within our projects as well, where we help our customers to do the transition. Quickly going through the transformation process, we will actually release additional guidance on this one within the MSDN so that every single partner, every single customer and vendor can actually help do the transition projects. We always approach this as a 5-step program. We start with the readiness. We want to make sure that everybody understands what is an app model. What does it actually mean? It doesn't mean store apps. That's the key point. It could mean store apps as well, but it means much more than that. And we want to make sure that everybody is on the same table before we move to the following stage. Then we do assessment. We want to make sure that we understand what the customer actually has as a full source code solution. We use the analyzing tools for doing that, and we concentrate on the business and functional requirements. What does it actually do from a UI and UX perspective? That's the key point. After that, we'll do a planning section, and we want to make sure that, okay, how do I actually then kind of implement that using the app model techniques? How do I convert? What does it mean now that I need to enable that particular functionality using the app model techniques? And then after that, we'll do the actual implementation, and then we'll do the deployment of the app model functionality to the farm or to the cloud or wherever we are. And then after that, we extract the existing farm solutions away from the farm. If we do that, again, it slightly depends on what is your objective and what are you actually doing and what are you planning to do. Before we go to the actual code demos, I quickly wanted to show you what are we actually going to release relatively soon, like mentioned in MSDN, related on the guidance. And then, trust me, we'll go to the demos which are actual code and actual farm solutions. So one of the things what we are actually using in our own projects is the SPCAF tool. I just want to make sure that everybody knows this. SPCAF, I'm going to actually zoom in. SPCAF is a free code analysis framework. There is a paid version as well, but even the free version can be used to analyze the existing WSPs. And what it actually does is that it breaks down the WSP package, the farm solution, and then it analyzes that against the Office 365 developer patterns and practices guidance. So it actually is pinpointing you what might be the problematic situation, what might be the challenge. And in this particular case, we're using just an example WSP package, and it's then showing me the results on that package. There are other tools as well, but personally I really like the SPCAF tool, and they've been highly helpful on providing a free tool available where people can actually use and look what might be the problems. So for example, in here we're able to see that we have a critical problem related on web template, and all of the guidance is available then how do we actually implement the transition from the full farm solutions to the app model. And really important thing, I'm not going to spend too much time on this, there's also references to all of this guidance in MSDN and also in the blog entries and in patterns and practices guidance. So you can easily then start thinking, okay, what do I now need to do because I have a web template or because I have X and Y and Z in my current deployment. Really great tool. The other thing what we're going to release relatively fast whenever I have a time to review this is a set of templates and set of guidance and set of process insights, which is essentially there for any partner to start doing a customization transformation project. So we want to make sure that our partners and customers and whoever you are can actually start doing a standardized and proven process to the transformation to the app model. If you want to do that, again, if that's what is your objective. So there will be a set of documents, there will be a set of guidance, and also a set of guidance in the MSDN related on the topic. Good, that's the process side. Let's actually move for a while to the slides, and then we'll move back on the demos. Actual code. Good. The key point of all of this is that if you're looking into the app model, which is the future in the on-premises as well, it's the Office 365 developer patterns and practices. I know that it's kind of a misleading, even though in the name it's saying Office 365, but it's actually the SharePoint developer patterns and practices. But it aligns the development, whatever you do, and it shows you how can you do typical customization using the app model techniques. And this is based on a real-life customer engagements. I was working 8 years as a principal consultant in Microsoft Consulting Services with customers before I moved to the engineering last year, and we still continue working with the customers on this one. So there's videos, there's trainings, there's MSDN guidance, and all of that available. Good. Moving on. Farm solution considerations. This is essentially the topic which we wanted to go through, because many of you probably still have farm solutions. Many of you still need to implement farm solutions. So what would be the right thing to do related on farm solutions? And what would be the techniques of actually implementing similar capabilities as the farm solutions using the app model techniques? So we're going to concentrate on the following key topics, and there will be quite a few demos on this one, which will be hopefully entertaining. We're going to slightly talk about the content types and site columns. We're going to talk about list definitions. Probably many of you have actually done list definitions. I'm going to show what's the challenge related on list definitions. Field types are really problematic. I don't know if you actually know that. You shouldn't be doing field types in your farm solution. They are actually evil. And I will explain how they are evil. We're going to also talk about site provisioning, the different options, and I'm going to show you how to do site provisioning using the remote API way. So you can actually get rid of the custom site definitions, hopefully, and even the web templates are partly evil. They're not as evil as custom field types, but still. And a small story about the timer jobs. Actually, we'll skip that timer job one anyway. But what we actually want to do is that we want to minimize the challenges of the future updates within the farm solution. So let's concentrate first on that one. What do we actually need to do? And the challenge of the farm solutions is that any customization, any customization which is actually creating a dependency of the content to farm solution is kind of evil. The good example is the custom field type. The field type is actually something which is storing your data in a content database in a custom managed code way. So essentially, if that field type doesn't no longer be present in the farm, that data is inaccessible. You cannot access that data, which means that if you would retract the farm solution away from your farm solution away from your farm, all of the data which is using a custom field type would essentially be locked. you can actually access that. There are ways to then mitigate that, but you cannot access that because the data is stored using the field type meta information, and that's a problem. And I'm going to show you in a demo how you can do the similar functionalities as typically you would do a custom field type. How can you do that using dark model techniques? One of the challenges is also the content type and site columns. I'm going to quickly explain what's the challenge. And this is one of the story where we need your feedback towards the engineering as well. Is this something what you are looking into? But I'm going to explain the challenge. I'm going to explain the recommendation behind the challenge as well. The challenge of the whole story is that whenever we create content types and site columns using feature framework, you actually create a dependency on the content type and site column to a feature framework XML element in the file system. And that's a dependency where we don't have any way of actually cleaning that away. And I do know that it sounds weird, because we've been doing those XML-based content types and site columns for years. What are you now saying suddenly this kind of a statement? The challenge is that in the product, we don't have right now a capability to clean up this dependency. So let me explain the challenge and how you can actually avoid that if you start creating new farm solutions in the future. The challenge is that whenever we actually create that, take a WSP package into a use, we are essentially deploying a feature A. The feature A is responsible of deploying content types A, B, and C. Those content types are actually stored in a file system, in an element XML file, behind the 15 Hive, the C, program files, common files, Microsoft Share, Web Server, extension 15, template feature A. Template features, feature A, that's the right thing. So they're stored there, and the content which is actually using those content types, they have a dependency. They are referencing that content type directly in the element XML file. So now if you have, for example, information architecture, where you deploy a content type across all of your site collections, all of the site collections and the data in the site collection is referencing those content type definitions in the file system. If you're retracting that solution, it is fair point. All of the existing content will be still available. But those site collections which don't use these content types will not have these content types available no longer in the site collection level. So then you will end up in a situation where your individual site collections are having a different set of content types. And then that's going to bite you when you're actually doing a maintenance in the longer run, which is a bad thing. How we could actually fix this is by using a following approach. And I know that this may sound terrifying, but it is guidance what we are having right now. We have a features deployed, and we actually create those content types using feature receiver, using code directly to the content database. The reason why we do this is essentially the content type then looks like, it feels like, it smells like that it was created using the UI. And there's no actual dependency on that farm solution. So now I can retract the farm solution, and all of the existing content will work as it does in the site collection level. And nobody will actually even know that it was deployed using a farm solution level. This might not or might be a problem for you. It again slightly depends where are you heading and how you're moving between the on-premises if you're moving to the cloud. Do you need to really care about this one in detail? We'll talk about that more in upcoming articles in MSDN as well. But there is a challenge, and it's good to be aware. If you can change your way of implementing stuff, please do, because that's going to be beneficial for you as well. Good. Let's move to another thing where we actually start doing demos. I think I have still 5 demos to go, so finally get something to show as well. List definition challenge. One of the challenges is we really want you to avoid list definition if possible. List definitions will create a dependency on a schema XML file, which is stored in a file system as well. And it actually means that that schema XML file has to be in the context of the farm, or the list doesn't actually work at all. So if you're actually planning to move away from the farm solutions at some point, and we're retracting the farm solution away from the farm, those lists are no longer available. Well, they are there, but they don't actually render because the type definition doesn't exist in the farm. And I'm going to show this one in practice. So essentially what will happen is that you will have a feature D, which is deploying a list definition A and B, its schema XML file in the feature framework level, which is then creating a dependency in a content database to that file in the 15 Hive. And that is actually now the biggest challenge. How can we fix this? I'm going to quickly show one slide before I do this in a demo level. And the reality is that we don't have a let's say, bulletproof fix on fixing existing sites on this one. We're working on more guidance on these things, but the possible solutions is to change to a sandbox solution, which is not a good story, but it's better than having a farm solution, even though you would actually need to, even better would be going to that model. Or then you need to do a content migration to out-of-the-box list. Let me show this one in practice. So I'm going to actually jump to one of my environments. This is the one which we have in the Microsoft Azure. Just double checking that I'm on the right machine. Here we go. So let me show you what I actually have here. There we go. And hopefully, just going to refresh the pages. Everything is fine. Excellent. Connectivity is good. So what I have here is two solutions. The one solution is a list definition, and one is a list instance. I'm going to zoom into the Visual Studio in a second. Now, what we have done here is that I'm actually lagging the zoom it on this virtual machine. Give me 1 second and jumping between the things, because it would be great that I would be able to zoom you. I should have actually double-checked this one. You can absolutely give that feedback in the evals. Sorry for that, but that doesn't luckily take that long. There we go. Control 1. There we go. Now we're good to go. So we have two different actual farm solution. One farm solution is a typical list definition farm solution. It's a farm solution which is deploying a list using Visual Studio tooling. And I know that this is a sad story. The Visual Studio tooling is actually promoting wrong way of doing stuff. And trust me, we are working on fixing all of this stuff, but it's actually slightly horrifying from some perspective. Now, what we're doing here is that we typically, when we implement a custom list definition, I'm going to open up the element.xml file, we do something like following in a feature farm solution. This is pretty low-level stuff. If you're into this one, you like it. If you're not into XMLs, you don't like it, what I'm going to demo. But in here, what we have is a list template, which is using a type called 50,501. We randomly created a new list definition. The list definition itself is actually in the schema XML file. They're luckily not as horrible as they were in 2003 version. You can kind of figure out what are they doing. But that's actually telling how the list will be rendered. And this particular fellow has been deployed on this particular green site. So this is the original list definition. And I have a list which has 2 items in the list site. Now, the problem of this story is that this list in this site collection, in that site, has a dependency on the schema XML file, which is deployed in the 15 hive of the farm, or the server. So now if we want to get rid of this farm solution, we essentially go to the solution management. You know how this actually works. I'm going to retract the solution. It's going to recycle. There's a small hiccup. It's going to give me a 503 in a second. Dun, 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 retracting. I can do some dancing. And this is also one of the story of farm solution development. If you're farm solution development, it's always a horrifying thing to do these demos, because you need to wait for the things to recycle, and then you need to come up with jokes, and I'm embedding jokes. I'm not that funny guy. But I can do stage diving. And nobody would be catching me anyway when I'm jumping down. So this is typical. It's a farm solution. It's going to do application pull recycle, and the farm will be then cleaned. Essentially what it's doing is refreshing the memory of the servers and IIS servers. It makes sure that that farm list definition is no longer in the memory of the application pool, because clearing up, we're retracting that solution away from the servers. And what's going to now happen is that if we go back on this fellow here, we're going to go on the front page of that site. So it's going to actually rebuild the site and the XML. It's reading the XML from the 15 hive. It's figuring out what kind of features I have, what kind of definition I have. And then we're actually going to go to that my custom list site. I can see that the farm's central admin is already updated. We can see that the status is no longer not deployed. We're trying to retract that farm solution away from the servers of farm. And now if we can get the application pools to reload in the intranet side or in the UI side, we're able to see that we have a small challenge. But it's working on it. Come on. This is the farm solution development story, right? Which is every now and then it's pretty painful. It's actually probably coming up pretty fast. Here we go. There's my list def. It's working on it. Something went immediately wrong because I was trying to actually get to that access. And this is actually as expected. So now if I go to that list definition site and I click that my custom list, which was created by that definition, because the definition doesn't exist no longer in the farm, it cannot actually render that UI because it's looking away from the 15 hive. And it cannot find a list definition with a type of 50,000 and whatever, 105. So it's a challenge. The other fellow, what we're doing here, actually, let's jump on the right one. So it's actually taking advantage of so-called list custom schema attributes. I'm going to quickly do some enters here so I can zoom the text and elements slightly bigger. And what we're doing here is that we are taking advantage of a custom schema attribute in a list instance element. Really low-level stuff, I know. But what's interesting is that we're actually creating a template type called 100. And then, during provisioning time, we're still taking advantage of this custom schema XML. So what will happen is that that list is actually saying, I'm a custom list, I'm an out-of-the-box list, even though it actually has additional settings and additional columns in the UI. So I'm going to jump on the second fellow. Here we have the list F2. We're able to see that there's additional columns in the list and there's additional settings in the list. The story is pretty simple. You can kind of figure out what's going to happen. If I retract this list instance, that list is not actually impacted in any way because we are actually just defining that alternative schema XML during provisioning. We don't actually use that alternative schema XML after the provisioning. It's almost like the end user would have gone to the list and modified the list and then defined the changes, and then it would actually work as such automatically. Making sense? Good. It's going to retract and it's going to do the recycle. I'm going to quickly go here. And it's going to actually it's going to now load some of the stuff. So I'm going to go back on the demo slides for a second, and we can come back and make sure that that list is actually properly rendering. So we don't have to wait for things to load. Yes, let's do that. So main PowerPoint presentation. And let's move on things. That was a really simple demo on the farm solution challenges. The content itself has a dependency on the 15 hive. And that's where we are then kind of locked. We need to figure out how to get it actually the dependency away from the content if we want to retract that farm solution away. If you still do farm solutions, it would be great if you could actually avoid the situation where you build that kind of a dependency like using this list definition in your custom code. And that's essentially a guidance which hopefully you can bring with you when you go back on the home. The one thing that I also mentioned already is the custom list type, field types. Custom field types has a similar kind of a challenge. They are actually, whenever you do custom field types, you are creating a dependency within your code content to your XML files and a code within the server itself. So that means that you cannot actually access the content in a similar way as we cannot access that list when we retracted the farm solution away. Now, typically the reasons why we implement a custom field types is let's say an advanced scenario, advanced UI. Some sort of a cool UI which is doing something funky. And you want to have that within every single list. You want to render that list in a slightly different way. But in SharePoint 2013, also in on-premises, even though I'm going to do the demo against the cloud, but this absolutely works in the same way in on-premises, we're able to take advantage of so-called JS link capability, which will actually give us the exact same capability as a custom field type. So we're able to override the way how we render the stuff from a UI perspective, which is essentially the business case for the custom field type. So we're just taking an alternative approach to write up the similar capability using just an alternative technical solution. So let me switch back on my demo machine. I just want to make sure that if you followed up on this one, I'm going to click here. We're able to see that my custom list is rendering properly. and the fellow is okay, this is the previous demo, even though both of the solutions are retracted. Just proving the case on the previous demo. Good. Moving back on the custom field types. So what I wanted to do is quickly show you one of the examples and one of the demos what we have in the Patterns and Practices guidance. So let me zoom here. Patterns and Practices guidance have a demo called branding.client-side rendering. And this is showing how you can build typical custom field type solutions using app model techniques, either in cloud or in on-premises. Just for being convenient, I'm taking advantage of the cloud. So I'm actually deploying that to the cloud, but this is absolutely working in on-premises as well. But it has a similar end-user capability, and that's now the key point. And this is actually really cool stuff, as long as it stops working on it. There we go. So what I've done already is that I deployed the application. Well, that looks slightly weird. Yeah, there we go. There we go. So the application, this is a typical Patterns and Practices sample. It is explaining what is it doing. It has a guidance on you, and it's essentially there's documentation how you can actually get started. I've already provisioned this functionality, and what it means is that in my host web, like within the SharePoint lists, I actually have some custom capabilities now light up. What is the typical use case for the custom field types? Well, somebody wants to have some sort of a way of rendering stuff differently. Really simple example, we're rendering priority using colors differently based on the priority value within the list. That's really simple stuff. And actually, let's not actually do that. Let's do something else. Percentage complete. This is actually a really great story because we can actually bring and implement this in a level of whatever we want. So now, whenever we take advantage of a JS link capability, what will happen is that the value itself, that percentage of the completion, is actually stored in a text field. But we present that information in a differently. We present the information using a JavaScript. So JavaScript is the one which is actually rendering that thing, and that means that it has no dependency on the farm solutions, and it actually works in the on-premises and in the cloud in the same way. I'm going to show you in practice what's actually happening when we do that. But you can actually go to the level of editing controls. So if I edit the functionality and edit the item within the list, there we go. We're able to see that percentage complete as a control, which I'm able to do a sliding on the control itself. It's actually a text field. We're just presenting that control in a differently. And let's put it in 90. Let's click Save. That was a task number 1. And then we're able to make sure that the task number 1 is set in the 90% level. So that's working properly. So we're overriding the UI experience of rendering that particular field. Let's do one more, because these are actually really cool stuff. You can do whatever functionalities as you want. But what's really kind of a common request is that we want to have a cascading lookups. We want to have a lookup field where you're able to then cascade based on the selection of the previous field. So, and this is just a mock-up on doing that. So I'm going to call here car A. And I'm going to zoom in so you can actually see what I'm doing. So there's a title field, there's a car selection field, and there's a color which is not enabled. Now, based on the selection of the car, is it a BMW? I have a different set of color selections in that list, other than if I, for example, select Fiat 500. Whoop. So it actually has a cascading dependency between those two fields. The data is stored as a SharePoint field item in a similar way as it is in the on-premises or in the list items. But we are again rendering that slightly differently, using JavaScript which is embedded on the list itself. Typical requirement, isn't it? You need to have a cascading selection of other fields. Let's actually go here. Do we get a BMW? What happened? Demo guards, come on. I'm going to do a quick refresh. Fine, it's an IA issue. There's nothing wrong with, it's a hardware issue. There's nothing wrong with the software. But I can certainly, that's a typical, typical functionality, what people want to have from a custom field perspective. And now you can truly do that. What actually happens in the background, as mentioned, this is a patterns and practices guidance example. You can absolutely go and have a more detailed look on the functionality. I'm not going to do detailed deep dive on what are we doing. But what happens is that we are overriding the UI selection. I'm going to show you that priority color, that color selection JavaScript. I'm not going to deep dive on the JavaScript itself, but what we have here is that we have a certain registration for the minimal download strategy. So it's going to work either in theme sites or in the publishing site. And it's then registering the priority field. It's interested on overriding priority field within the list. And then the actual rendering essentially is happening in a way that the JavaScript is taking over the presentation of that particular field. If the field value is, let's take the mouse away from there. If the field value is high, it's going to render that in green or red. And if the field value is normal, it's going to be orange. And if it's low, it's going to be green. But it's pretty much the similar capability, but we're using client-side functionalities to enable this additional capability. That's the key point. And that works in both on-premises and within the cloud. Good, I'm going to stop that one, move back on the slides, moving into the following topic, where we do have quite a few demos still. Now, moving on to the following topics. What about site definition and web templates? And what is the site definition and web template challenge? We really need to be aware of the different options. SharePoint is all about site provisioning, and you know that, and I know that. And we always start by we used to create a site definition. Then we started moving on the site templates and site web templates. But it's really about how do we actually provision those sites, and then what are those elements which we have a dependency within the provisioning technology. And we really want to move away from the feature framework implementation of the templating engine. I'm going to do a few demos related on this one after the slides. But what it means is that if you think about the different options, SharePoint is all about site provisioning. And it is definitely the heart and soul in the app model implementations as well, because it is the engine which always creates the sites ready for the content editors to start using with the right branding, with the content types and site columns and all of that. Now, what we need to understand is that within the new age implementation or in app model implementation, we actually take a slightly alternative approach. But let's think about those options. If you think about the classical options in SharePoint, we used to create site definitions. The site definitions has been there since 2001, SharePoint 2001, 2003. In 2007, they were pretty clean already. You could kind of figure out what the .NET.XML is doing. But it actually had a dependency on the major version of the SharePoint upgrades. So even in on-premises, when you moved across the versions, you needed to make sure that those sites are upgrading properly, because you actually were owning that .NET.XML for those sites. It might or might have been an issue for you, and slightly depends how your site definition was implemented. But it's definitely something which we cannot, well, if you want to move your sites from on-premises to the cloud, you shouldn't be thinking custom site definitions, because you want to have a match in the cloud. In the cloud, there will be only out-of-the-box site definition, out-of-the-box templates. If you think about also the site definition usage, it was all about taking more or less, we copied the out-of-the-box theme site, then you modified that out-of-the-box .NET.XML to have maybe branding elements in it, and then you got a whatever Contoso theme site, which has the right branding, right settings, right documentation automatically. So really it was more about extending the site definition, which was out of the box. Options available is good. You're absolutely able to do a lot of different stuff there, but the cost impact in a long and a short and a long term is pretty significant. Then we introduced, well, at some point at the same time, pretty much, we have a site template functionality. Site template is the one where you go and save site as a template, which is working or not working, slightly depending on what features your site has enabled. As an example, if a publishing feature is enabled within your site, that link is gone from the site settings site. It is not supported to create site templates from a publishing site. You can absolutely go to that URL and do that, but there's no guarantee that that's going to actually work. And the site templates, so the options available were essentially fair. They do work in the Office 365 though. So you're able to actually do them. They're kind of app model compliant. That's what working in Office 365 essentially means within the slide. Then in 2010, we introduced web template, which is essentially an adaptation of the site template. What it means is that you're building your own web template, site template manually in Visual Studio. You can actually do a lot of stuff. You're able to do really kind of complex stuff. You're able to do publishing sites, and you're able to do whatever is needed within the site level. The challenge is that you still have a feature framework dependency. The challenge of the web templates is that you usually start by copying out-of-the-box template. And we do actually even evolve on-premises out-of-the-box templates. So it might be that your web template is not getting all the updates what we're introducing in the out-of-the-box theme site. And that's the challenge with the web templates. It doesn't keep up with all of the introduced functionalities. The next option is SharePoint server-side provisioning, which actually is a good option. What it means is that we're using server-side APIs to create the site, and then we're applying using server-side APIs the needed branding on the sites without using web template. I don't know how many of you have ever heard about the site provisioning provider, but that was a freaking cool, is freaking a curse word. I was asking this in the morning. I'm not a native English-speaking person. Excuse me, I'm not a native English-speaking person. It's a really cool functionality. But you're able to then create sites which are created. You create those sites using out-of-the-box site definition, for example, theme site, and then you modify that site based on your business requirements. Then the site is actually saying that, hey, I'm an out-of-the-box theme site, even though it actually is looking completely different. And now what we do within the cloud and in the app model, we actually take advantage of the so-called remote provisioning terminology. We take advantage of the same thinking. Essentially, we always start by creating out-of-the-box theme site or out-of-the-box publishing site. And then we go and run code to modify that site based on our business requirements, based on the thinking, based on the requirements, based on the template definitions. You can absolutely introduce alternative templates. You can introduce alternative definitions or options for your end users using the remote provisioning technology as well. Options available, excellent, because it's pretty much, it works in Office 365. It's the same thing as with the SharePoint server-side creation, but you're able to do this one in Office 365. So it's kind of the best option available. It does, however, requires that you're writing code, which is a small challenge of all of these things. In the Patterns and Practices guidance, we do have an awesome Patterns and Practices provisioning engine, which we're going to actually demonstrate in the following session. I'm going to demonstrate the more, let's say, higher level stories and actually really cool stuff during my demo as well. But there's a specific engine, an XML-based provisioning engine available for the remote provisioning as well, which is really cool stuff. Now, let's go back on the demos, and let's do two different demos related on the remote provisioning, because I think it's really important that people understand how these things actually work. And I'm going to partly use the cloud, and then I'm partly going to use on-premises. But I'll start with cloud, and then we actually move to a hybrid story after that one. So let me switch back on my demo site. I'm going to use the cloud, and excuse me for doing that, but I'm going to use the cloud for the sake that it's so much easier. The same code, the same functionality works as such within the on-premises as well. So don't worry about that one. But I really want to make sure that people actually understand what are we doing within the remote provisioning functionality. So what I have here is a Patterns and Practices example called Provisioning Subsite Creation App. It's, thank you. Thank you. I'm in the wrong. I was wondering why is it so black. There we go. So what I have here is a provisioning a subsite creation app. And I'm going to concentrate first on the subsite creation, which is kind of I'm doing that in a vice versa way. But I'll come back on to that one when we do the following demo. But one of the things what we need to consider is that whenever we create site collections, we actually, if we want to own the site provisioning, it's not just about owning the site collection creation. It's also about owning the subsite creation. Because any end user can go and create a subsite underneath their site collection as well. So you need to make sure that you're owning that capability. Essentially, you're overriding the capability so that you're able to apply whatever branding, whatever elements or information architecture needed to those sites. So that the end users don't actually go and create a, let's say, enterprise search site underneath, or try to create an enterprise search site underneath the theme site, which is a really weird option that we're showing that within the UI, out-of-the-box UI. So I'm going to do an F5. All of the Patterns and Practices example mainly, they should work by default, just by pointing out to the right URL in on-premises or within the cloud, and you'll do an F5 and things just magically start working. Magic. And now it's going to spin up a browser. And as said, excuse me for doing this demo against the cloud. It's so much easier to do that against the cloud, and there's no network issues with the remote connectivity, even though I'm going to do that one still today as well. So this is my sub-site creation now. I'm going to start by creating a sub-site. The key point here to notice, I have multiple different templates. I have a team site, I have a Uber team site, and I have a super team. These are not out-of-the-box templates. So now what I can do, this is my UI, this is my code. So what I can do is that I can change the behavior of the provisioning based on that template selection. Even though behind the scenes I'm always starting by out-of-the-box team site provisioning. And then I apply the needed differences and modifications based on the selection of the end user. So let's give it a name. Let's call that Ignite. Ignite is going to be the URL, and let's do a description. I start with this one, and it's really working hard on it. So that I can actually show you how we own the site provisioning in reality within the site collections. That is indeed my application, which is just showing and taking advantage of the GIF animation, so it looks slightly different. It's working hard on it. It creates a subsite on the site collection. Then it applies the needed modification. It actually applying a theme, custom theme to the site, and it applies some other settings within the site. So it takes a while, but it's usually pretty fast. It tries to do it as fast as possible. And while we're waiting for that, what would I do? Let me go downstairs. I should come up with some stand-up jokes always when we have to do this. Here we go. Hey! There's my site. We Finns are so dry. We're not actually that funny. And there's my site. But the key point here, I need to start with this demo story with creating this site. So you could actually imagine that this is the root side of your site collection. What has happened is that we've created a site using a custom template, using the right branding, using the right options. We're able to create document libraries, content types, site columns, whatever is needed, using the remote APIs, using that remote provisioning engine. And now what's kind of a cool on all of the story is that if me as an end user, if I want to create a sub-site, what we're actually doing is that we're taking advantage of so-called JavaScript embedding capability, and we're overriding that link. And what will happen is that now the end user thinks that the end user will actually go to the out-of-the-box sub-site creation functionality. But let me click on that one. And I'm going to show you how this is actually implemented in a second. I'm going to actually go to my provider-hosted application. In this particular case, because it's a demo, I'm actually running the provider-hosted application from my local host. So that's the reason why the URL, there's the JavaScript exception. This is an out-of-the-box SharePoint exception. That's nothing to do with my demo. Which is kind of ironic, isn't it? We'll fix that. We'll fix that. But what will happen is that right now I'm actually running this application in my local host. But just as well, it could be in a Microsoft Azure. Or if you're in on-premises, it could be your on-premises provider-hosted application, IIS application. So now when the end user comes here, and the end user selects a creation of let me create a template, and we could change the UI to be whatever they want to be, so it's more like aligned with the SharePoint, we again take an ownership of the creation of the site. So therefore, all of the sub-sites have the right templates, right branding, right site columns and document libraries, and whatever is needed. And what happened within here, let me explain what are we actually doing in practice before we go to the following demo. Why did I press the stop machine? I'm going to actually start that one, and it doesn't take that long. Dun, 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 dun. There we go. Now it's already there. It's working on it. I'm not going to create a new site. I'm going to actually go to that sub-site which I just created, which was called as Ignite, if I remember correctly. So let's go to my root site, going to the site contents. And in my site contents, I can see the sub-site, and there's my Ignite site. So now, what happens within this site is that we're taking advantage of so-called JavaScript embedding. If you were in my session earlier, was it yesterday and this morning? I've been having quite a few sessions. I kind of explain what the JavaScript embedding also means. But we can bring it to the level that we are able to modify, for example, the sub-site link, or we're able to modify the behavior of the site completely. And what happens here is that I'm going to quickly show you this one using the developer tools, and then I'm going to show you the JavaScript in a more detailed using the Visual Studio. So as part of the site rendering, SharePoint is now adding additional JavaScript to the site. And if I could only remember the name of the JavaScript, customized injected JavaScript, that's it is. So as part of the site provisioning, site rendering and HTML creation, it will actually add this JavaScript to the site. And the responsibility of this JavaScript is to go and see, am I in the site contents page? Oh, I am. Let's go and change that link to point to the provider-hosted application. So now what's going to happen is that in my Visual Studio, I'm going to go here. I'm going to show you the actual code quickly. Dun, 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 dun. There we go. And I'm going to zoom the, slightly so you can actually see what we're having within that JavaScript. We're registering that against the MDS, so the minimal download strategy, so that will actually work within the theme sites and publishing sites. Then we're doing calling this sub-site override inject. What's that doing is that it's actually checking, am I in a view lists page? Essentially the page which is the site content page. If it actually is on the view list page, we'll override the link to the app URL. And now how we're doing that we're running JavaScript, which is essentially taking instance using jQuery. That's not actually jQuery, just as well it could be jQuery. It's taking instance on that link, which is in the site content page, and it's just updating that point to my local host in the demo case. In real world, it would be pointing to the provider-hosted application. So this way, you actually take a full ownership of the site provisioning, and therefore you're able to override whatever is actually created for you. We start by creating out-of-the-box theme site, and then we apply the needed branding, needed settings on top of it. Good. We have still 15 minutes. I'm going to take 5 to 10 to go slightly more advanced, because I wanted to actually test some advanced scenarios as well. In on-premises, this was on-premises story, but in the same way as in Office 365, we're able to use the exact same capability. What's also interesting is that we're able to mix and match and create a hybrid story between the on-premises and cloud. And what I mean with that one is that we are actually able to provision from Microsoft Azure against on-premises. So if you want to move to the app model and you don't want to invest to the app model infrastructure and you don't want to even enable any of the app model things, you don't have to. You can actually run your application in the Microsoft Azure, and you're able to then provision individual site collections to the on-premises using Microsoft Azure technologies. And let me show you this one in practice. So I'm going to close that one. That's going to free up some memory, hopefully. And there's my remote server, which is actually in Helsinki data center. So I'm using a direct access connectivity to the Helsinki data center. I'm able to show you what's happening at this time in the Helsinki, 6,000 miles away. That's going to be there. What I have in Helsinki is there's a service waiting in my on-premises farm. I'm going to actually quickly explain this one. It's a service which is waiting within the on-premises farm connections or requests to create on-premises site collections. Essentially, it is taking advantage of Microsoft Azure Service Bus. I'm going to show you a drawing pretty soon, which is going to clarify this slightly. But it's waiting for somebody to poke it and say, create me a site collection in on-premises using the remote provisioning story, and give me the site template in a way that it has all the branding, all the settings, what is needed based on our business requirements. You could just as well run this completely in on-premises. You don't have to combine the Microsoft Azure. I just wanted to go an additional mile and do a hybrid as well, just for the sake of hoping that the demo cards are working properly. So that service is running in on-premises SharePoint server. There's no app model enabled within the on-premises server. It doesn't have to be. And now what we're doing here is that I have a really funky-looking, really cool-looking UI. This is one of those VESA designs. Sorry for that. I'm really famous of implementing cool-looking UIs. You'll see what I'm saying whenever the functionality is up and running. This is really complex UI for end users to figure out what does the end user want. There we go. Hybrid site collection provisioning. But what we have here is a simple UI. It could be much more complex than this. It could have whatever the UI thing is you want. It could look really fancy and fancy and whatever that means. I don't know. But let's give it a name. So the end user comes to a UI. They want to create a site collection using the remote provisioning pattern. I need to be also clear on this one. It doesn't have to be code. The remote provisioning could be driven by PowerShell. It could be somebody calling to an administrative and saying, I want to have a new site collection with the default templates. The administrator creates the site collection using central admin and then clicks a PowerShell. And the PowerShell is actually applying all of these settings. So it doesn't have to be a provider-hosted application, just to be clear on that. Now, but what this one is doing, let's call this Ignite demo. Wow, something is happening there. And I can select the template for my Ignite demo. I'm going to use the collaboration site. And then I have a site target. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to set the site target as on-premises. Whoa, on-premises. So I'm going to use the same UI to either provision site collection using the remote provisioning pattern towards cloud or towards on-premises. So now when I click create, what's going to actually happen, it is storing that request to Azure Storage Queue. And in the Azure Storage Queue, it's going to see that, we have an Ignite demo request. Environment is actually on-premises. So that means that I need to actually call my on-premises service, which is waiting in the on-premises site. And then it's going to create that site collection administrator as me within the on-premises. The key point of all of this is that we don't have to actually expose anything in the firewall. We don't have to expose anything in the reverse proxy or anything else. In the on-premises, that service could be running as a Windows service, and it's actually watching to the cloud. It's watching to the cloud. Do we have requests? Do we have requests? Do we have requests? Oh, we have a request. And then that pulls. Because it's the service from on-premises towards the cloud, not cloud to on-premises, you don't actually have a security breach, or you don't actually have to have that secure reverse proxy exposing any additional settings. So this actually works relatively nicely, or crossing fingers that everything is going fine. So that request with the title of Ignite Demo has been sent. And now if everything is fine and we go to the on-premises site, we should actually get that request visible in the on-premises site, and that's going to then file up the creation of the site collection. What actually happens on the background is that within the Microsoft Azure, we have a web job running, and that web job, give me a second, I'm going to go here. So I'm taking advantage of the Microsoft Azure as my provider-hosted application engine, and in my web job and in my Microsoft Azure, that's the one who's deciding, are we actually going to create the site collection to the on-premises, or it's going to be creating to the cloud itself. There's my web job, which is for some reason in a stopped status. Now it's in starting status. So for some reason the status was stopped. I have no idea why. Don't ask me. Now it's in running status, which is already a good sign. I'm going to go for web jobs. I'm not going to actually deep dive on a web job because this is not a Azure web jobs thingy. And they have logging, which is brilliant. I can actually go to the logs themselves, and I can see how the web job is actually behaving. And we should see that calling to on-premises in the logs of the web job. While we're waiting that to actually come, there we go. There's the logging. It's going to show you that. It's in a running mode, and we're able to see that it's actually running that sort of a command. There we go. Title equals Ignite Demo. Target environment on-prem. And what should now happen, if I go back on that console application in my on-premises farm, we should actually see a request in my on-premises farm, which is saying site collection with the title of Ignite Demo has been requested. And now we're able to actually go and see what was actually created within the on-premises. What happens here is that we're using that service application connectivity, and I'm going to actually show you what we got, so I'm not actually fooling. That was, by the way, pretty fast creation of the site collection. Every now and then, it's a positive surprise how fast these things actually work. SharePoint as a fast, interesting. I should remember that I'm working in Microsoft every now and then, but and they're getting this recorded. I do apologize my behavior. Now, so let me spin up a new browser, just making sure that I'm not actually fooling anything. I'm going to paste in that URL, which I essentially copied from that console application, which could be running as a Windows service. And what happened was that based on that request, which happened in Microsoft Azure, we actually got a request to on-premises, and it actually took advantage of the remote provisioning. It created as a team site, but it actually created as a team site with the right branding and right settings and all of that, without any templates. So, and the magic what happened in the on-premises, the things what we only needed to configure is actually in here. I'm going to quickly show that one as well before we are summarizing today. So we have a connectivity to the service bus, but because this connectivity is from the on-premises towards the cloud, we don't need to expose any endpoints. It's essentially this application which is connecting directly to the cloud and watching do we actually have any requests. And then it doesn't take advantage of the app model. It actually is provisioning stuff using CSAM, client-side object model, using this information in here, which could be absolutely encrypted for if needed, but I'm actually on the server, so it doesn't mean a thing. But I'm using a CSAM in on-premises to provision a site collection, and then I'm applying the needed modification like the branding, document libraries, site columns, and content types using code to that on-premises site collection. That's remote provision. There's no app model infrastructure enabled in this farm, and we don't have to, even though we're just processing those incoming requests using this functionality. Now, I do know that this might be quite, wait, what is actually happening? And that's the reason why we actually have a 50-minute video just on a hybrid site collection provisioning from Azure to the on-premises. One of the patterns and practices guidance video. So if you're interested on this one, you can definitely, absolutely find that from Google, I mean Bing, if you use that chat title. Easy jokes, I know. But if you try that title from Google, if you're interested, you absolutely land on this one. It will be in Finglish, and I do apologize for that one. But it's explaining much more detail what's actually happening. If you want to do that only in on-prem, that's fine as well. You can take advantage of the absolutely similar thinking only in on-premises. But now we have sites which don't have any dependency on those feature XML files in the 15 Hives, and they will actually work, even though we retract solutions away from the farm. Let's go back on the slide. Yes, let's go back on the slide and summarize. I do have one slide just to make sure that you actually got what I was showing with that one, just to explain that one more time. I was running a hybrid story in the way that I was running Azure application in Microsoft Azure. Whenever I actually created that request, it was stored in the Azure storage queue. I just to get advantage of the Azure storage queue, and we don't have time, unfortunately, to go through the code today, but have a look on that video, you'll understand what's happening. It's 6 lines of code. Then what that storage queue actually poked my web job, which is essentially my worker process in the Microsoft Azure. And then this is still kind of a cloudy stuff, but actually if this based on the selection, it either creates a site collection to the cloud, but then the on-premises connectivity was done using Service Bus Relay. And in the on-premises side, I was having a Windows service which is waiting for those requests to come. And then I'm using remote provisioning, creating a site collection using CSAM and remote APIs with the right branding and right settings. I know that this could be overwhelming demo, and I'm using an cloud to demonstrate you the remote provisioning, but I wanted to go slightly more on the let's say, enterprise designs, which could be really interesting. I do know that many of the enterprises are looking into this section and these ideas as well. There's, by the way, the AKA MS address, Office Dev PnP videos, and from there you can find additional videos related on patterns and practices guidance and learn how we're actually recommending to do all of this stuff. Good. Let's do a quick summary and recommendation slide and close up for the day. So what we went through, we started with the recommendations. I started with this exact same slide. We are gradually moving to the app model. We want to gradually move there. We do, however, understand that if you want to do farm solutions, fully supported, you're absolutely fine. But start thinking about the future. Start thinking about the fact that if I implement once, it would actually work on both sides. If we will be in on-premises only, in isolated on-premises, farm solutions are absolutely supported. You can still take advantage of the CSAM and remote APIs in on-premises as well, because then you don't have to do recycle of application tools, wait like we had to wait in this podium. to that the farm to actually come back live. There won't be maintenance breaks within the on-premises if you take advantage of that model functionality. About sandbox solutions and feature framework solution, we talked about the transformation end user experience and transform the functionality, not actually the code. And hopefully I was able to show you what does the farm solution impact actually is. And so you can start thinking about moving or changing your way of implementing stuff. But that's all we're going to do today. So thank you for your participation. And please do remember to do evals. Thank you.